The Vatican stood still, draped in silence and mourning, as the casket of Pope Francis glided past rows of motionless guards, until one of them dropped his weapon. The crash of steel on marble shattered the sacred hush, drawing gasps from the crowd and sending cameras whirring toward the trembling figure of a young Swiss guard. His face was pale, his hands shaking, but his eyes didn't flinch. No one knew then that this single moment of humiliation would ignite a transformation so profound it would leave the entire Vatican in tears. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The sky above Vatican City hung heavy with gray, casting a mournful pall over the limestone grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica. Wind stirred only in suggestion, too respectful to intrude. The air was swollen with reverence, yet charged with the electric hush that precedes a monumental silence, one that would be remembered by history. A million hearts beat in rhythm with the toll of the bronze bells. Each chime carved time into stone. In this choreographed stillness, every breath felt sacred. Elliot Brooks stood amid perfection. Crimson plumes, gold embroidery, polished halberds aligned with ruthless precision. But within him, chaos whispered. The muscles in his back burned from the rigid posture, sweat pooling beneath starched linen and steel. He wasn't just another soldier in this ceremony. He was the outlier, the uncertain one, the mistake waiting to happen. He had felt it since dawn, before the sun dared rise on this most sorrowful day. He had buttoned his tunic with trembling fingers, his reflection in the barrack mirror staring back like a stranger, eyes wide, pale and unsure. "Remember your oath," he had whispered. But memory did nothing to anchor the storm within him. The casket emerged, white, unadorned, and heavier than its silence. The choir's first note swelled through the square like a rising tide, and time, for an instant, folded into something eternal. It was then that it happened. The halberd slipped. It was not loud, but in the vacuum of ceremony it exploded, a metallic crack that shattered the cathedral of silence. The weapon clattered onto the marble like a cry of heresy. The world turned its head. Gasps from the crowd. Cameras swung like predator eyes. One cardinal lowered his chin and muttered something under his breath, a brief syllable like a curse. Elliot stood paralyzed, his throat clenched as if he had swallowed stone. His gloved fingers twitched in shameful aftershock, his knees locked in defiance of collapse. Commander Kelly's eyes met his. They didn't flare with anger. Worse, they dimmed with disappointment. No words, just the look of a man who expected failure and received it. By nightfall, Elliot was invisible. No one spoke to him at dinner. In the barracks, his presence hung like a sour fog. Boots stomped past him without acknowledgement. A senior guard chuckled, low and scornful. "Next time, drop it on your own foot. At least then you'll have an excuse." In his cot, Elliot stared at the ceiling and prayed, not for forgiveness, but for disappearance. Not even God, he thought, would reach for the one who broke the silence of saints. The morning after this collapse echoed louder than the clang of falling steel. Elliot moved like a ghost through Vatican corridors carved from centuries of faith. Cold, silent, judgmental stone. Whispers followed him, not loud enough to be addressed, not soft enough to be ignored. They slid between tapestries and over marble, carried by rustling cassocks and glances that did not meet his eyes. The Swiss Guard prided itself on silence and stoicism, but within that discipline thrived a quiet cruelty, one that needed no words to wound. He didn't need to check his phone. He knew. The air told him. Every breath from the others was measured and a little thinner around him, as if he had sucked reverence from the very oxygen. Still, confirmation came. A Vatican press aide approached as discreetly as scandal would allow, her clipboard tucked tight to her chest like a shield. Her voice was a whisper, sharp and clinical. "They want to contain it," she said. "But it's already out. Twitter, TikTok. Some American tabloid ran a headline." She didn't quote it, but Elliot already had. It was branded into his mind like a hot seal. "Swiss guard drops weapon during papal funeral. Disgrace or grief?" He didn't answer her. He didn't nod. He turned and walked deeper into the Vatican's maze, into the parts where even shame felt holy. That evening, as the bells tolled none, he found himself summoned by Father Thomas Whitaker, the old chaplain who had outlived 5 popes and buried more dreams than most men dared hold. The sacristy was dim, lit only by the eternal flame, the red sanctuary lamp that glowed above the altar like the last ember in a dying fire. Father Thomas didn't speak at first. He moved slowly, deliberately, the way a man does when he knows silence carries more weight than pity. He poured 2 chipped cups of coffee and placed one before Elliot. "I dropped my chalice once," he said. The words broke something, not with noise, but with relief. Elliot looked up, unsure if he'd heard right. "During a funeral?" he asked. "My first mass," the priest answered, eyes lost somewhere long ago. "I thought I'd be exiled, but grace doesn't arrive in perfection. It waits in failure." The air held still, reverent. Elliot's voice cracked when it came. "I just wanted to honor him. Pope Francis, he saw people like me, people with nothing." Father Thomas leaned forward, voice as soft as scripture whispered through confessional grates. "Then become the kind of man he would have blessed." In that dim room, surrounded by silence older than empires, something shifted. Not in the world, but in Elliot. Not loudly, but undeniably. The transformation did not begin with a revelation. There was no grand sermon, no flash of divine light illuminating Elliot Brooks's path. It began with repetition, quiet, brutal, humbling repetition. 1,000 silent mornings before the sun had touched the dome of St. Peter's, when frost still gripped the colonnades and even the pigeons slept. Elliot would rise, dress, and report to the courtyard long before the drills began, not to be seen, but to change. He practiced until his muscles ached and his vision blurred. Precision, posture, breath control. Every movement memorized. Every failure revisited. The halberd that once betrayed him became an extension of his body. Not for glory, not for redemption, but because he had to become something more than the boy who had once dropped steel on sacred stone. At night, while others drifted into sleep, Elliot sat cross-legged in the barracks library beneath a flickering gas lamp. He read about the foundations of the Pontifical Swiss Guard, the sacking of Rome, the martyrs of 1527. He traced each line of Vatican law with the hunger of a man rebuilding his soul from scripture and sweat. The past no longer loomed like a burden. It became a blueprint. And then came the orphanage. No one wanted that post. Too quiet, too insignificant. The children were rowdy, the hours long, but Elliot asked for it. Among the Vatican's forgotten corners, laughter bloomed. It began with clumsy storytelling, tales of Swiss heroes, of guards who fought off armies with courage alone. The children listened with wide eyes, then imitated his stance, giggling as they wielded broomsticks like halberds. Luca, a boy no older than 8, with hollow cheeks and 2 old eyes, never left his side. He never spoke of his mother, but he clutched Elliot's hand with the desperation of one who had lost too much too young. Elliot never told anyone about the fire drill, the smoke, the locked door, the fear in Luca's eyes. He simply acted, lifted the boy to his chest, shielded his breath, and led him through the haze. Not a word to the commanders, not a note in the incident report. Weeks later, in the Sistine Chapel, as incense drifted beneath Michelangelo's Last Judgment, and choirs sang Agnus Dei, Elliot stood at the back, forgotten by the cameras, uninvited to the formation. But then, Luca stepped forward, clutching a hand-cut card, his voice high but unwavering. "For the man who made me believe in strength." Elliot's breath caught. The silence was absolute. Inside the card, 5 uneven words in a child's trembling hand. "You made him proud today." No medal ever carried that much weight. The office of Commander Mason Kelly was austere, its walls lined with centuries-old ledgers and Latin-inscribed volumes, its windows thick with leaded glass that filtered Rome's morning light into quiet shards. The kind of room where nothing was said without weight, and where silence itself pressed down like a decree. Elliot stood at attention, the door closing behind him with a soft finality. He didn't speak. He didn't dare assume the right. Across the wide oak desk, Commander Kelly sat still, his eyes not on Elliot, but on a small laptop replaying a video. The video. The footage from the funeral. No sound. Just the slow, dreadful moment, the halberd slipping, the crash, Elliot flinching, frozen. But then, his eyes. Kelly shut the screen. "I watched it 100 times, he said, his voice low, measured. "Your hand was shaking, but your face wasn't." There was no rebuke, no absolution, just that. The commander reached into the top drawer and pulled out a thick parchment envelope sealed in red wax, bearing the crest of the College of Cardinals. He didn't pass it. He slid it, quietly, deliberately, like a test in a silent cathedral. Elliot broke the seal. The breath left his lungs. He had been selected to bear the crux papalis, the ceremonial cross at the next papal conclave, a symbol of continuity and sacred transition, carried only by veterans, men with decades of unblemished service. Until now. He looked up, searching Kelly's face for some catch, some mistake. The commander only nodded. "Earn it." When Elliot stepped out of the office, something intangible had shifted. Not in the world. In the way the world looked at him. Where once came silence, now came nods. Small ones. From guards who had once passed him without glance. There was no applause, no ceremony, just acknowledgement, the currency of respect in a place that valued restraint above all. The mocking headlines vanished, drowned by quieter stories of a humble guard seen escorting orphans. Father Thomas placed a firm hand on his shoulder before Mass and said nothing, yet the pressure spoke volumes. And in the courtyard, beneath the gaze of Bernini's colonnade, the children ran to him like he was something more than steel and uniform. "Captain Elliot," they called him, unaware such a title didn't exist. But titles are sometimes born, not assigned. And months later, when the conclave drums echoed through the stone halls and all the world's cameras turned toward the basilica, Elliot returned to the very place where he had once fallen. He stood taller, not because his back was straighter, but because he no longer carried shame, only resolve. The halberd was steady in his grip, but so was something deeper, dignity, forged not in faultlessness, but in the act of rising when all had seen you fall, and standing unshaken in the light of their memory.